cloud. And good, okay, let's get started. Bektur. Bektur Ryskeldiev is joining us live from Japan. He's originally from Kyrgyzstan, a fantastic mountain nation in Central Asia. He's a researcher and a very creative technologist, focused on new ways, new methods of computing, and new methods of new ways of human-computer interaction. He's currently a senior research scientist at Mercury at a startup called Mercury, and at the same time, a visiting researcher at the University of Tsukuba, where he was previously. That's it. That's my introduction to your very vast and creative activities. Okay, I ask Laura and Marjorie to please kill your video. So stop your video. So we give full bandwidth to Bektur. You can go.
Thank you for the introduction. Let me share my screen. All right, you can probably, yeah, you can see my screen now. So good morning from Japan. I guess good evening, depending on your time zone. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm very excited to be here. It's a very interesting panel. It's also my first time participating in Leonardo talk. So I hope it would be interesting. It's kind of my collection of thoughts on the nearest futures that we will see in the field of immersive interactive media where I'm working. So I would like to start my presentation with sort of a personal anecdote. As Pierre just mentioned, I'm originally from Kyrgyzstan. And actually, despite my country being right in the center of Asia, they're pretty remote. For instance, right now I'm working in Japan. So to go back to my home country, I actually need to take a round trip all the way through Turkey, for instance, because there's no direct flight back to my country. And quite similarly, during my stay in Japan, I've been living in Japan for almost 9 years. Most of my work has been located somewhere in the mountainous regions because that's where universities usually are. I used to work in University of Aizen Fukushima and the University of Tsukuba. Then only now I moved to Tokyo. And the reason why I'm telling you this is because turns out when you're living in a remote location for a very long time, it makes you really interested in remote communication technologies because you are relying on these technologies on a daily basis for your work and sometimes even for social life, as we also have learned throughout the past years of pandemic. And one problem that I kind of have with remote communication is the sort of a discrepancy between the evolution of technology and evolution of interfaces. So for instance, if we look at the 10-year time span in between what we saw in mobile technologies and what we saw in online communication, you might notice this kind of pattern where, for instance, our phones have gone from a simple device with a screen and a camera to something that has two 3D cameras strapped on in the front and in the back, whereas the online communication tools such as video calls and video streaming are still somewhat restricted to, well, basically a rectangle is in a rectangle, as we're having a Zoom call right now. And one might ask is, how can we actually breach this gap in between hardware and software and the interfaces that we're using to access? Because we are seeing that there is a lot of progress that is being done on one side, but perhaps not enough work being done on the other. And the answer to that is actually something that is being tackled in the field of immersive interactive technologies. So before I continue, I should probably kind of tell you what I mean by immersive interactive technologies. Usually when I'm talking about this topic, I'm kind of using it as an umbrella term for several different technologies that are kind of related, but actually separate in real life. It's usually augmented virtual reality and everything that comes with it, such as, for instance, mixed reality and extended reality. I'm also talking about remote spatial and multimodal interactions. So not necessarily, for instance, AR/VR interactions, but there could be different kind of systems that could be using, for instance, mobile devices or other forms of interaction, and as well as animation and visualization that is also closely related to the other previous two topics. So just to give you some examples of how this gap was actually being breached or addressed in the previous years in augmented virtual reality research, some of my favorite examples include, for instance, works by Microsoft, where we're using either personalized displays with holograms to remotely communicate, or when they were using room scale interactions and room scale projections and displays to interact, as well as different examples of wearables, for instance, by using a combination of mixed reality and electric muscle simulation to simulate virtual objects, to some really strange or I guess unusual combinations of technologies, such as, for instance, the project that was done by Ricky Montal Laboratory maybe around 5 years ago that made circles around the press by the name of Human Uber, which is kind of looks like an iPad strapped to a person, and perhaps it is. So while the question of the gap between the technological progress and interface is something that I guess would be persistent in this field of research, one might also ask, as the technology is becoming more mature and more mainstream, what kind of other problems can we tackle? And how can we use for instance, immersive media for social good? And I feel like there are at least 3 major directions in which these problems are being tackled, and at least this is the directions that I was involved in for the past few years. They include accessibility, or the improvement of quality of life, communication, mostly online and offline communication, and communication with humans and communication with robots, as well as creativity and self-expression, where people are finding a new way of interacting and collaborating online. So in the rest of the talk, I'm going to give you a few examples and ideas on how people are kind of working in these areas and what kind of interesting, I guess, opportunities emerge from it. So when we're looking at the topic of accessibility and inclusive design, there's an actual interesting, very practical problem that is especially applicable to Japan. For instance, in Japan, what we have right now is the age of super aging society, which means that Japan is expecting a lot of the population to be over 60 or 70 years old within the nearest future, and which creates a certain gaps in different social and economical structures. For instance, there's not enough nursing care workers, or there's not enough, I guess, infrastructure to actually support the aging society as of now. And one way to kind of address that, or the one ways that people try to address that, is by using immersive technologies. So for instance, by solving different communication or interaction problems that are actually coming with this infrastructure issues. And it is something that my group has been working on for the past few years. We've been running workshops, mostly ideation workshops at conferences, as well as doing different prototyping projects. For example, one of the famous demos that we showcased throughout the past 5 years was the remotely controlled wheelchair. So for instance, we had a demo where there was a motorized wheelchair that was controlled by a virtual reality headset. So it was kind of like a self-driving car with remote interaction. And for instance, a nurse could connect to it and drive the patient remotely without having to be there in person, which could possibly address the problem of, for instance, lacking human resources. Another more recent example that my group did was helping people with deaf or hard hearing disabilities to actually have better communication, better understanding. There was an OLED display that kind of captured the audio and wrote real-time transcription. So it's basically kind of like real-life subtitles. While it is perhaps not as future-driven as one might expect from this kind of technology, it is very practical and very applicable. And if you happen to be in Japan, you can actually try its demo, I think, at the Museum of Information Technologies American. Other inspirational examples for me in terms of accessibility include the recent work by Avatar Robot Cafe. It was done by Ori Laboratory. And this is a project that allows people with certain, for instance, disabilities such as paralysis to remotely control the robots. So they are usually having some kind of iPad application or a virtual reality headset that allows them to remotely connect to an actual functioning robot that for now works in a cafe and communicate with people and be sort of reintegrated back into society and having an improved quality of life. So these advances in accessibility also offer us some new opportunities in communication, or at least they're related to the new opportunities in communication. In particular, I think immersive interactive technologies are introducing interesting opportunities in human-to-human and human-to-robot communication, especially remote collaboration and cooperation opportunities. For instance, this my favorite example of such a demo by my colleague Yaman Sareji and his group that was done a few years ago at SIGGRAPH, where this kind of remotely controlled, I guess, robot was attached to your back, and another person who was using a virtual reality headset could work with you in real time together to complete certain tasks. Other examples that include is, of course, the metaverse by Meta, which is a sort of a vision that has been brewing for a really long time, and now everybody is talking about it. But that being said, I feel that perhaps there is no such necessity in having a high fidelity interaction, in the sense that perhaps what if we don't need very precise copies of us to interact online? And actually, this is something that is also tackled within the academia and industry. For instance, there is a Japanese startup that I have been following for the past years called Tonari, where their product is the proposal of using a whole wall, like a wall-sized projection, to create a sort of a portal to another part of the world. And while this interaction is perhaps less high fidelity, such as, for instance, animated avatar interactions, it provides for some interesting interaction dynamics that could perhaps provide a more natural form of communication. When it comes to robots, a lot of work was being done by my colleagues at Keio University and Tokyo University. The project that I just showed you with the additional robot hands was extended in multiple applications further at Keio Media Design by including, for instance, control of the wheelchair. And other examples that really impressed me last year was I guess the kind of the first demo of multi-presence that I saw in the recent years. It's a work by Sony CSL where through a creative way of visualization of real-time interaction, one person could actually control multiple robotic hands and could, for example, as a demo I did, you could play tennis, table tennis with multiple people at the same time. Well, I'm not going to show you the whole videos, but you can check it out for yourself. I think it's a very interesting example of how one person can control multiple surfaces or multiple machines. And I feel like this is definitely something that we'll see more of in the future. Continuing further in terms of communication, I guess in general, there is a sort of a movement within KAI and AR/VR research towards understanding how we can communicate with artificial intelligence and robotics, considering the pace of the development of science right now. For instance, as far as 3 years ago, Junri Kimoto proposed this sort of taxonomy of integration between human-computer interaction and AI. And he was kind of thinking like, what kind of zones of interaction we could build based on this sort of synergy in between these two research fields. More recently, researchers have been looking into writing a taxonomy between visualization of augmented reality interactions and robotics. So I think this paper by Ryo Suzuki and his co-authors was published at CHI this year. I suggest you to check it out. I think it's very interesting. To go ahead further, this kind of advances in perception and interaction and collaboration have more opportunities in terms of creativity. So, for instance, there are several interesting projects that are coming to, that's related to computational creativity that are exciting me, especially in the recent years. For example, this is an example of a VTuber. It's a movement that became really popular in Japan in the past few years, where it is the sort of a virtual motion track character is being represented as a virtual avatar of a person in real time. And there's an actual community, channels like social media channels, etc., that are related to it. So this kind of, I guess, forms of communication are allowing us for new forms of creativity, self-expression, and collaboration online. To give you a few more examples, of course, this is an example of a system for VTubers. So you could either have a complex motion tracking setup, or more recent applications allow you to even use your own phone to animate your own character. And you can kind of create your own identity online, or your own unique way of self-identification. I'm also very impressed. I have been following work by So-Bin Chung, who was working on collaborating with robots for drawing. And I think this is something that I will be seeing more in the future from other artists and researchers, as well, as we're having more opportunities to, I guess, have more seamless interaction with robotic interfaces. Other than that, the advances in capturing technology also allow us to have more interesting ways of expression and interaction online. Some of the interesting works that were done recently, especially by my Japanese colleagues or artists that are based in Japan, was photogrammetric works. For instance, this is a work by Ruben Forsali, who did a photogrammetry scan of, I think in this case is Hanoi, but he usually works in Tokyo. And more recently, there was also a work by Sony CSL in terms of facial recognition and facial morphing. They're using some kind of generational approach to kind of change your identity, which I thought was an interesting concept. Going further, I guess recent changes in terms of the pandemic, collaboration online, and creativity have offered us interesting opportunities for global collaboration. For instance, I feel that before the pandemic, to exhibit in some city, you had to probably apply for a conference and go through a complicated process. Whereas nowadays, it is becoming much easier and much more common to have an online exhibition or some form of hybrid exhibition. So just to give you a few examples, the media artists that I showed you just now have also exhibited around Tokyo. There's like a set of displays. And I thought it was interesting that you could kind of see all the immersive media artists that you usually see at conferences and online within your city. And I think this is the kind of opportunities that we'll see more in the future. For instance, last year, there was a virtual hybrid exhibition that was done in Malaysia. Is the video just going too long? Yeah. Whereas they had a sort of a setup that was live streamed in real time, and you could kind of submit your art and have this sort of hybrid exhibition. That being said, these opportunities are coming at a cost. I feel that there are multiple concerns that are coming to immersive interactive media. One is the privacy. The prevalence of tracking technologies that are being used here, of course, are causing a lot of concern. which include facial tracking. There's a lot of biometrics that companies can extract when you're using different headsets and displays. On top of that, there's also a sort of a movement towards open door photogrammetry and tracking that people are concerned about. For instance, AR cloud and metaverse are one of the primary concerns in terms of how we can allow people to actually look into our spaces. There should be some kind of regulation. And this has been in the talks for the past 4 years. And I'm not, I guess I'm expecting the conversation to continue in the nearest future. Finally, I guess another question that I usually have is, if we have the opportunities and problems, how can we actually find solutions for the future problems? And I believe in terms of technology, we have this sort of a cyclicity of technology, where a technological progress is usually inspired by the previous work, and that previous work is in turn inspired by some kind of art, etc. So I feel like there's a consistent cycle of past work inspiring art and art inspiring work at the same time. So I think if we want to find the solutions for the problems that are emerging in immersive technologies in the future, perhaps we have to look in the past. So some of the major takeaways from my talk, I guess, would be that the future interactive technologies are also a lot of new opportunities in terms of quality of life, communication, and creativity. There are some concerns, including privacy issues. And I think not all hope is lost. So there is a certain cyclicity and innovation, and we'll be able to find the solutions for that in the future. If you want to learn more about this kind of work, I, of course, here at Leonardo, so I think you know how to find it. But that being said, I'll be happy to introduce you to some of the scientific communities and conferences that we're running on these topics. If you have an opportunity, I suggest you to check out some of our panels, or please let me know if you want to get in touch. I think that's all from me. I hope I'm right on time. Maybe I'm a little early, but thank you so much. I'll be happy to take any questions or comments.
Yeah, one field that you didn't discuss is education. How can these new technologies improve education?
Well, that is a good question. So at least from what I'm seeing is more immersive interactions online. For instance, interactions mixed reality could be a useful technological educational tool for students. But that being said, other options would be, for instance, are we talking about education of humans or training of robots? For instance, there's been examples of how people also used this sort of immersive interfaces for simulation and training of artificial intelligence and robots that I think could be interesting.
Yeah, I'm thinking more of schools, just schools. I mean, COVID, of course, has accelerated the transition to online education, and right, there's a lot of discussion of what gets lost when you don't have the physical interaction with the teacher and the other students. So I was wondering, how can new technologies overcome this limitation?
There's a good question. Personally, I think it will depend on the rate of adoption of displays in the technology we're having. I think we're still kind of confined to this sort of a form factor of communication through rectangles. So I feel that as soon as the I guess an average user or children within school would have an ability to use more immersive forms of displays and interactions, I think we have more ways to actually implement the I guess new forms of interaction in education.
Mm-hmm. So Japan is often ahead in adoption of new technologies. Have you noticed some practical application in the Japanese universities of these new technologies?
Practical applications. Well, personally, I was very impressed by some of the accessibility works that we've done that I mentioned in the slides. For instance, the example of real-time captioning was done because we had a deaf and hard-hearing student in the laboratory, so we had to find a way to communicate with him. And that project was kind of based on a necessity that was developed rather quickly and put into production and is now being used. Also, real-time captioning in general was actually became somewhat popularized once we made it open source. A lot of people at least in the Japanese community on Twitter started using it. So that was kind of interesting. I guess there is a demand for real-time captions in Japan.
Okay, you don't have a question, but there's somebody from the audience who wants to get in touch with you. So I'll let you read the Q&A. It's not really a question, it's just an invitation to get in touch. Let's see in the chat. Could you explain a bit more of how virtual reality in Japan, Korea, and Taiwan exchange or complement each other's research?
Right. So this is a kind of an interesting question in the sense that usually when you go to computer graphics conferences, especially conferences like SIGGRAPH, the venues that are working on AR/VR demos are mostly dominated by Japanese universities. At least what we did, we looked at the statistics, and it seems that almost 60–70% of demos were coming from Japan. That being said, there's a lot of strong research that is emerging from the other parts of Asia. In Korea, for instance, there is a very strong, there's a lot of actually strong schools, but it's mostly represented by KAIST. I think it's Korean Advanced Institute of Technology, from what I remember. There's kind of a lot of diverse work that is being done. I think there's a lot of overlaps in topics. So in that regard, I guess we're sort of working on the same thing. So there's not a lot of complementing in terms of research, but I feel that right now, most of the presentation is still being done by Japan and Korea. And I hope to see the rest of the Asia being more represented at the international conferences and international community.
Okay, great. This was a great survey of uses of these new technologies. So I assume progress depends a lot on the power of the machines, on the chips and so on. Are you optimistic that there will still be a lot of progress in the fundamental electronics that powers these things?
Right, Moore's law is still a problem. I think there was recently people were talking about the new law that was called after the director of NVIDIA, something about the increase of the computational power of the graphics cards. Yeah, but personally, as a computer scientist, I'm not sure. I feel like people, one way or another, will still find a way to kind of take advantage of the current technology. I'm personally more excited about mobile technology and how this kind of work is getting more miniaturized or getting more accessible for an average user. And I think we still have a lot of kind of runway to have some kind of innovation within the, I guess, nearest 10 years.
Great. Well, thank you very much. This was a very nice survey and introduction to the field.